Good morning, my dear HTMC members and friends. I'm Suzanne Marion, co-president with Dr. Roy Wiley and Susan Fishman of HTMC. We welcome you to this morning's program, and we express, as always, our tremendous appreciation to our program co-chairs, Debbie and Gayle. We're all looking forward to this presentation, All in the Family, featuring speakers Erica Robinson and Marina Brubaker, superb musicians who will speak to us today about their experiences of growing up in families with multiple musical siblings who also reached the top of their professions. I was told that Marina's brother, David Brubaker, is with us today as well. If he is, we welcome him. Former HSO member and currently a member of the Minnesota Orchestra. Debbie has told me that the Playing Through the Pandemic program in regard to the Houston Symphony has become a model for other orchestras. We will be treated to performances by some of our wonderful members following Erica's and Marina's talks. Debbie Moran, violinist, and Olive Chen, piano, will play Simple Gifts, and Gayle Martin will perform for us the first movement of the Schumann Fantasy. We want to make sure that you're aware that our meeting on January 26th from the other side of the world will take place in the evening at 7 p.m. because it does literally come from the other side of the world. Our speaker, John Sharpley, is in Singapore. John's mother, Geraldine Sharpley, is a longtime HTMC member. We have many performances that are coming up in the near future, which I was asked to very briefly mention. On February 9th, we have Music and Instruments in India. On February 23rd, Handel's Birthday. On March 9th, Music in Black and White, a very relevant salute to diversity, featuring performances by award-winning high school choruses in Houston. On March 23rd, Playing Through the Pandemic, how did they do it? And on April 13th, in remembrance of things past, a travelogue for the music lover featuring a talk by our own co-president, Susan Fishman, describing her many musical travels with her husband, Jay, in Europe. Thank you very much again to our wonderful program secretaries, program chairs who made this possible. So sit back and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about why I decided to come up with this idea. I'm sort of an almost musical orphan in my family. So I'm the only classical musician in my immediate family. When I go to reunions, I'm the only classical musician there out of the extended family. Like there can be 80 to 100 people from my dad's side. My mom's side is large. I did find out that there's a handful of classically trained relatives, but they were ones I never knew in my childhood. And so I wondered what it would be like to grow up in a family of musicians where a large family, I only have one brother, and then on top of that, one in which everybody's musically trained. So both, I know Erica Robinson from my childhood. She goes back to high school when we were in youth orchestras together. And her parents were in the Houston Symphony while I was growing up watching them play. And her mother was still there when I joined. And I gradually met her other siblings along the way, although I don't know them quite as well. Marina joined the Houston Symphony not long after I did. And she's also from a large musical family of 4 siblings and parents who are all professional musicians in major orchestras. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some photos. I'm going to let Marina start first. And I have a little bit of their family history. I'll let her describe the photos. And then we'll get to Erica's family. And then I have some questions for them. And then we'll allow you guys to ask questions after that about their experience. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen at this point and ask Marina to unmute. So Marina, this is you in the Houston Symphony. Are you there? And if so, I'll go ahead and put on your first historical photo.
So this is a picture of my parents. My mother's on the left and my father's on the right. My mother was a violinist and my father's a violist. And they're playing with Achilles Balabanis. And this was in Wichita Falls. My father started the string program in Wichita Falls. He actually taught band and orchestra. And then the next year, they hired 2 more teachers, one of them being my mother. And I was actually born in Wichita Falls before we moved to Tucson, but they spent, I would say, I'm not sure, about 5 years in Wichita Falls. And yes. And that is my father directing in Wichita Falls when he was very young. He was an orchestra teacher as well as a violist. And in fact, we discovered from some letters last year after my mother died that he had been the president of the Texas MTNA in his last year when he was in Wichita Falls. And this is my mother in later years and when we lived in Tucson. And it's a group of women that lived in our neighborhood, actually. My violin teacher and my brother's violin teacher is at the top. That is Theodora McMillan. My mother's on the left. And Ruth, I can't remember her last name, is a cellist. And Rosemary Goldsmith is the violist. And you may have read an article that Martin Goldsmith wrote about his mother. She played in the camps in World War II. And then she came to the US, and this is when she retired and she moved to Tucson. And they formed this quartet. Okay, this is the 4 of us. And Ruth Bell, my brother says Ruth Bell. Do you have David unmuted, Debbie? I'm the oldest, David is the youngest, and there's 12 years difference. The cellist is my brother, Stephen, and he spent his career in the Tucson Symphony. He stayed in Tucson his whole life. He doesn't play anymore, but he played for many years and also in the Tucson Pops Orchestra. And my sister Catherine is the lovely curly-haired girl on the left, and she is a violist now in the Chicago Symphony. David is in the Minnesota Orchestra. And this was from a newspaper article. Again, there's no David because I think he was only probably about 4 then. So this shows that the musical family continues. This is my sister's daughter with my mother. And we were on vacation and she was giving her a lesson. And she's not a musician, but she did play very well as my nephew played piano. Asha is her name, and she's now a ballerina in the Alabama Ballet. And that is my sister Catherine. That's a picture that the Chicago Symphony took. That's her professional picture. And that is my brother Stephen, the cellist. That's one of his last photos from the Tucson Symphony, I think. And that, of course, is David. This is from a time when we all 3, not Stephen, but the 3 other kids played at the Grand Teton Music Festival. And that was a really nice summer. So we got to play together, coming from different cities. So that was a nice summer.
And continuing with Erica.
Hi, this is a picture that I had done with my dogs, all 3 of which have passed. I have a new family now. This is a picture of my siblings and I. My oldest sibling is Sharon Robinson, and she is a cellist with the Kallichstein-Laredo Robinson Trio. She also teaches at the Cleveland Institute of Music. I said she's a cellist. And in the middle, in the back, is my brother Harold, or everyone calls him Hal. He's the principal bass of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And then that's me with I can remember getting my hair done that day. That was probably the only day I had my hair done. I was so excited about getting my hair done. That's me on the right. And then my little brother and sister are fraternal twins. The little girl is Kimberly Robinson and the little boy is Keith Robinson. Kimberly is in Gallup, New Mexico, and she plays with regional orchestras in Colorado and New Mexico. And she's also an incredible jazz, popular music. She loves to, what is it when you make up stuff as you're
Improvise.
Improvise. Oh, yeah, she's a great improviser. And then my brother on Hal's lap, Keith Robinson, is the cellist in Miami Quartet. I knew I'd freeze once I started speaking. He's a cellist in the Miami Quartet, and up until the pandemic started, he was the cellist in residence at Kent State University, but he is now retired. So this is it must have been in the early 60s. Oh, this was an article in the Houston Chronicle that similar to Marina's family picture. That's my mother in the foreground, and my father playing bass in the background. And this was a picture done for the Houston Chronicle. They did an article on our family. My sister Sharon playing the cello in the middle, and my brother Hal in the back next to my father. And my little brother and sister are holding music. So that has got to be they were born in 62, so it's got to be 65 or 66, 1965 or 66. And this is a picture in the Daily Cougar, Cougar, which is the magazine for the newspaper for the University of Houston. And a father and son playing with the University of Houston Orchestra. My father taught at the University of Houston, and I guess they had some sort of blended orchestra. I don't know who the people in the forefront, although I believe they're trumpet players.
Yes, I've been hearing about sitting near to trumpeters from my friend who's playing in a community orchestra.
This is my brother Hal. He's the principal bass of the Philadelphia Orchestra. He's probably my closest sibling growing up. We used to save money together and go down to the 7-Eleven and buy candy. He's a fabulous bass player. He has a fabulous studio. He loves his students, takes them in, and they become his family. But he's very dedicated to his teaching studio. It's also, with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And he swears he's going to retire in a year and a half. So, and this is my sister in the Kalkstein-Laredo Robinson trio, Jamie Laredo and Joseph Kalkstein. That's not too long ago. My sister always looks the youngest in the family, even though she's the oldest. I swear it's because she didn't have kids, but
there's something to that.
She takes fabulous care of herself, and she's the matriarch of our family now, and she takes care of all of us. She keeps in touch with everyone's birthday, everyone's significant event, and she's just a fabulous sister. And this is the Miami Quartet. I'm not sure how much they've been able to do since the pandemic, but that's my brother with the cello, and his wife, Kathy Meng, is standing next to him. And this is my little sister, Kim. She's playing a violin with a hookup. She's about to improvise with a band. She loves playing with the local bands, and she is just, if you were ever to hear her, you would. I always say she's the most talented in our family. She's just can play with such inhibition. It's just really amazing. And this is a picture not too long ago, 2 years ago, at my son's wedding. I was so honored that all my siblings came to my son's wedding. It was in Galveston, of all places. Everyone showed up. Everyone flew in. And of course, these are the three sibling females in my family. And I point out that the picture on the left, Sharon Robinson, looks the youngest of the three, although between Kim in the middle and Sherry is 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years. She's 12 years older than Kim and 5 years older than me, but she looks the youngest. It was a fabulous party, fabulous wedding. Thank you.
So I'm going to stop sharing them. That's the history of these families. And I have some questions that I was interested in. If Gayle thinks of anything I haven't thought of, please jump in. And then hopefully all of you guys will have a chance to talk to them. Of course, one of the most obvious questions is, given that you do have parents who play instruments, not always the same instrument as every child, but how many of you started on, say, one of the same instruments that your parents played, and how many of you are, was your first teacher the parent? I've heard both situations where the parent teaches first, and ones where families where the parent says, I don't want to be the teacher.
Should I start? Should I start?
Why don't you start, David?
Yeah, you had a lot of string players in the house by the time you came along.
Yeah, well, so Marina's 12 years older, so she left the house when I was 5 to go off to college. And so the three of them were all sort of in a group, and they got to play together, and which was probably nice. I don't know, you could tell us, Marina, but so my mom started me on violin when I was 7. And I probably had the least amount of, like, so I had that one private teacher that Marina had, but it was only for my senior year of high school. And the rest of the time it was just sort of, I'd get lessons here and there from my mom, but it was, it probably wasn't ideal because, you know, we both fought with each other a lot. And having a teacher would have been better, actually, a separate teacher. But I did start on her same instrument. I think Marina played a lot more piano. My piano skills are almost nothing, but I did end up playing the oboe for about 4 years because I was asking for a clarinet. And then for my 11th birthday, I got what I thought was a clarinet, but it turned out to be an oboe. And I just said, okay, I'll play this. And I played it. And actually, I sort of regret not continuing with it because it was really nice.
You sounded great. He was a great oboe player. You sounded beautiful.
Thanks.
Marina, since you were the oldest, were you, I mean, I've noticed that some of these families have sort of ensembles within them. I mean, I was wondering, like the
Yes.
first child, if violin is the first instrument, say, to start out with teaching a child, and then you start adding some of the lower instruments as the kids come along, except in Erica's family. But yeah, how did that come about that you started on, did you start piano first and then violin?
I really don't remember, but I know I had a little plastic violin, so it didn't occur to me to play anything else because my parents both played, but viola and violin. I just wanted to do what they did. Like David, I studied with my mom off and on. But I did have piano lessons. I did have piano lessons, and I was more of a pianist. And I thought I actually would be a pianist until high school. And the way I kept playing violin was just by playing in orchestra. And it was a time to see friends and have fun. And that's why I didn't become a pianist, because I always felt like you didn't get to play with people enough. You didn't get to see people every day and rehearse with them. So that's sort of, and then I had a violin teacher when I was 14. That's the first time I had a separate violin teacher, Teddy McMillan. Yeah, but I don't think that I was a very good violinist actually growing up, and I certainly don't remember practicing much. What I do remember is that my mother would teach. She taught sometimes just one year. I remember there were so many students that she taught every day after school and starting at 8 on Saturday morning, all day Saturday. And so it was sort of up to us to take care of ourselves. And she would say, you need to practice this. And I would pull out the violin. And then as soon as she went in to teach, which was at the other end of the house, I would pull a book out, and every once in a while I would play something. But as soon as I heard the screen door slam with the kid leaving, I'd immediately start practicing. So I was not a good student. And it was really, sometimes I think something just switches in a student. I say that to parents of my students now, that even if you don't think they're going to be, the parents despair, this is not a good musician, can't do it. At some points, for some kids, they just decide that they want it so much that they'll do it. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah, a little bit to me also. I wasn't actually thinking of being a violinist for most of my time growing up. Erica, what about you? You had mentioned something yesterday about.
Well, my parents, my mother especially, was a phenomenal teacher of little kids. I don't remember what elementary school here in Houston she taught at. I want to say Peck. But anyway, she would be gone in the mornings. 6:30, she'd be at school teaching little kids. But her feeling was that each one of her children should start on piano, and she felt very strongly about starting the kids on pianos to train their ears, because the piano does not change pitch. It trains a small child's ears. And I don't know if this had anything to do with it, but all 5 siblings had perfect pitch. So I don't know if that's inherited or learned, but so we all started on piano around age 4 or something. And then she would start us on violin. Now, my older sister Sharon did start on the cello, but my brother Hal, who plays the bass now, started on the violin, and so did the twins, my younger siblings, and they also played harp. I remember playing on there was a local television show called Dialing for Dollars, and my little brother and sister were in the harp studios of B. Rose, and on Christmas morning we all gathered. I think it was Channel 13, but anyway, Dialing for Dollars. We played. They played the harp, and I played Gounod's Ave Maria with the harp accompaniment with B. Rose's harp class on Christmas morning. I'll never forget that. But it's funny, Marina would bring up, because my parents taught all day long, every day after school and everything. And I was told to go practice. And I thought I was so clever. I recorded myself practicing what I was supposed to be practicing. And I would turn it on up loud while my mother was teaching, and she could sort of hear it in the background. Oh, Erica's practicing, but it was a recording. So, and I'd be reading a book or doing something else. But it wasn't until age 19 that I got that switch turned on, that I wanted to play the violin for a living. Before that, I had a lot of sibling rivalry. My sister was so fabulous, and she went to the Congress of Strings, and my brother was just so fabulous. They were both, I was daunted by their talent and their and their ability. So I really didn't think I was going to be a professional musician, until actually when I went to Meadowmount. Actually, Annie Kavafian, I don't know if you guys know of her. She's a fairly famous Annie. Anyway, she talked to me once about being a violinist, and what she said to me just kind of flipped that switch. But anyway, growing up, our household there was always music going on in one of the rooms. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. You could get away with anything you wanted if you were smart enough.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, you were one of the violinists I felt daunted by growing up. Definitely looked up to you in the community orchestras. So you answered some of the questions we had in mind, which is like age you started. And one thing I think you all answered a question I hadn't even thought of, which is with the larger instruments where it's hard to play it with tiny hands. It looks like maybe in some cases you get a head start thinking about music by starting on a smaller instrument first. And I've heard of bass players who are in professional orchestras who didn't even play an instrument until they were, say, age 12 or 14 and just started from scratch there. But I imagine that one thing I noticed about his approach to the bass, it's almost like a violinist. That sings the vibrato and everything else, sings in the way a violin does, maybe more than a lot of bass players. That's probably why he's principal in Philadelphia Orchestra. But I think I see that exposure to the violin and the way he plays. I had the opportunity to go to one of these bass gatherings because one of my best friends is an amateur bassist, and hear him there. And his playing was wonderful. I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions from my boyfriend, which I think are some of the best questions of all. And one of them was, did you ever rebel musically against your parents' taste, whether it was within classical music or other genres? The audience may not know that classical musicians are often a lot more open to other genres of music than classical music listeners are. But did that ever come up?
Well, I will say that my dad would buy me records. I remember having the Mamas and the Papas and Sergeant Pepper's, and I was just thrilled. But my mother, when I'd play it, especially the Mamas and the Papas, which if you go back and listen to it, this is true. She would say, "Oh my God, it's so out of tune. How can you stand to listen to that?" Yeah.
My father used to say, they can't sing. I don't get it. They can't sing. Why are they so famous? And now Yesterday is one of his very favorite songs at this point. But I think when the Beatles and all the rock started up, for them, singing was Bing Crosby, and with a beautiful rounded voice, and he would just say they can't sing. Erica, you're thinking.
Well, I don't remember rebelling against classical music or anything. My mother taught Kimmy and I how to stroll, and we would we would learn popular songs, the oldies like "Fly Me to the Moon" and "Around the World in 80 Days," and we did. I wish I'd found that picture. A picture of my mother and my sister Kim and I strolling in long pink formal gowns. We'd go to, we would literally get hired to play at parties, and we'd stroll from table to table. And my mother taught us the tunes, and we would harmonize, and that was I wish I'd found that picture of us in our pink dresses. It's quite astounding. But that was the only other genre I've ever played. But it was with my parents' permission. I mean, it was encouraged.
David, do you want to weigh in? If so, please unmute.
Okay, sorry, I had a pest guy coming, and so I had to step away, so I don't know what the subject was.
Oh, okay. So we were asking, after going through your early education, we're asking if you ever, this is actually my brother's question, did you ever rebel against your parents' musical taste, either within classical music or outside of the classical genre?
I don't think I rebelled against the musical taste. I had a period where, I listened to heavy metal and, whatever the rock and pop stuff that was going on in the 80s. But it was kind of short-lived. I think it was maybe 3 years And then I just remember that around the time I decided that I really was that I needed to buckle down a little bit, which was kind of getting into my senior year of high school, because at that point I'd gone to the Aspen Music Festival, and then I realized just how many amazing players there were out there, that we weren't as exposed to that in Tucson. And so and then I had a girlfriend who was a fabulous violinist, and I was like, I felt kind of ashamed of my abilities. So I decided I needed to really step it up. And around that time I really got back into classical music, and I would just, I remember falling asleep to the radio on the classical station. And from then on, it was, I didn't really look back as far as musical tastes go.
So along those lines, just an aside, my brother decided that he was going to be the coolest parent ever. He was not going to be one of those parents where he didn't like his kids' music, because he started a band when he was 13 years old, and he's on sort of the other side of the musical genres from where I am, although he appreciates everything. He hosts bands and folk singers. But he told me when his daughter was about 13 years old, he said, "I can't believe it, Debbie. She zeroed in on the only music I can't stand." He said it was Spice Girls and disco. So maybe just a generational thing. My boyfriend also asks, at what age did you realize that not everybody's family is a family full of string players? You always hear these celebrities say, "My kid is like, isn't everybody's dad on TV?" Or was it pretty obvious to you that you were not surrounded by people who were families full of string players?
I think it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
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 I guess
It was
you're
pretty
not
odd.
like in Hollywood where everybody's, among all the celebrities, where everybody is the same.
I actually have a question for Erica, because I was wondering, were your parents the only siblings or people in their respective families to be a musician, or did they come from musical families as well?
No, no, they didn't. My mother
Yeah.
had two siblings, and neither of them were remotely. I really don't know how my mother got started in the little town of Dansville, New York, but neither of her siblings are musical. And my father, some of his offspring, his siblings' offspring are musical. My cousins, but I don't know their childhood upbringing, how they got started.
Yeah, it's the same for our parents, I think. Yeah, my mother grew up in Kansas, and from kind of a poor family, and my dad, his background actually was his father was a Mennonite. So it's interesting that they surrounded themselves with so many musical kids, and they were so focused on that. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've kind of noticed, I don't know if it's like a pattern or something, but as generations go, it seems like the next generation seems to do a little bit better than the one before, but then it gets to a certain point where those parents are on a high level of musical expertise. And I find that it sort of hits like a ceiling. This is just what I've noticed. And then those kids typically don't pursue music because maybe there's too much pressure because their parents are so good and there's nowhere to go from there. I mean, I can't think of very many, let's just say, like famous musicians whose children also became accomplished musicians. I can just, maybe Igor Oistrakh is one person I think of. But I mean, it just seems like, I don't know if it's the pressure or to live up to it. But it seems like when there's somewhere to go, some growth, then it's easier for those kids to progress. I wonder if anybody else has noticed that.
I think you're absolutely right, David. None of the children of my siblings are musicians. not one. So
maybe also it's because they gave so much to become who they are, that they just, maybe they don't want their kids to go through that. Like, I mean, I personally haven't thought, oh, I want my child to be in classical music. I just want her to play, but I'm not going to push her into that for sure. I don't know if that has something to do with it.
yeah.
Then I had another question about playing together. So I'm noticing both of your families, there's actually an enormous range of ages. So even if you have a string quartet within your family, is there much opportunity to play together, say at family reunions or anything along those lines?
Oh boy, I just remember when Marina and all the older siblings would come home around Christmas. We would, and you can chip in, Marina, but I mean, we would typically go to the Unitarian church and play, or they would, and then as I got older, I would be involved too. But I just remember it being extremely stressful, and just a lot of yelling and screaming and trying to get out the door on time. And I don't really have any good memories of it. But later on, we did play stuff together. Like, I don't know, Marina, if you remember when Catherine's first husband was a clarinetist, and we played a concert for our parents, clarinet quintet and all these different things. There were some good memories, but I just remember it's not like what people usually think of when they think, oh, it must be so nice, you all play together. And I just remember a lot of chaos.
Well, it can be, and we did that recital in the Woodlands.
Yeah.
Catherine and you and I, we did the Dvorak terzetto, and we did some duets, and that was fun. And also playing. One thing I've noticed is that when you play with your siblings, I mean, you may have your issues, but you don't have to think about music. That, I don't know if you find that, Erica, but I find that you can kind of know what the other person is going to do before they do it. I mean, you just feel like you can play together easily.
That's going to bring me to the question after this, but I want Erica to weigh in. That definitely leads to my next question.
I can remember when we were very young, not very young, but I must have been 10 or 12. We would go Christmas caroling at Christmas time with my family, but we didn't have a violist. So we didn't play string quartets, but we would, my parents would have big parties and invite you. I think they were kind of infamous now, but I just remember there was a keg in the backyard every time, and there'd be people from the Houston Symphony, and everybody would just, be having a big party. And one of the rooms was the chamber music room, and we'd all play. All of us would play. We'd take turns, play a movement, and and shuffle through. The Rossini string quintets were the only thing that had a bass and no viola, 2 violins, cello, and bass. So it's quartets. They're not great works of music, but anyway, the one time that my siblings all played together was there. Can't think of the name of the festival. It was about 15 years ago. Not Kimmy wasn't there, but all my siblings were there, and we played a big. It was a big concert, and we played the Brandenburg Third Concerto with Hal and Sherry and Jamie Laredo, and Robbie and I. It was wonderful, but we haven't. We do play together, and I think Marina's right. When you do play with your family, it's just it's not competition, but there's no
It's instinctive somehow.
yeah, it's instinctive. Yeah.
So there was a question I had not sent you yet. And because I have noticed this, there's a couple other families I know, the Romano family. I don't know if you're aware of them in Boston. There's a couple, 2 violinists, a violin, viola, cello, and bass. And I had gotten to know Michael at Meadowmount, And I think at some point I even went to their home in Boston when I was visiting relatives and heard them all play together. I noticed they didn't even look at each other. They were playing one of the Rossini pieces with the bass in it. And the other thing I noticed is that their vibratos were simpatico. It's almost as if one person was playing all four instruments, and they barely looked at each other. And it was what I was going to ask about was what I call the family sound. So I listened a little bit to David and Marina on YouTube yesterday. Noticed kind of the sweetness of your sounds. I remember the Robinson sound being very thick and lush vibratos on all five of you, everybody. So it's almost as if there's not only a ability to feel music together, but a sound that's in your head that seems similar. And I don't know, this is a small sample, but that's what I've noticed. And I was wondering if you feel that that's unconscious, conscious in your training, or where that might come from.
I think it's probably my mother's influence there to teaching each of us at the beginning. She taught all of us, but she didn't have very good luck with continuing to teach us because we would rebel against her. And actually, my first private teacher was Ray Flegel, and I think I must have been 8 or 9, 10, and then studied with Josephine Boudreau, who was a pretty famous teacher here in Houston. But that sound you're talking about, I think that comes from my mother's early tutelage. I really do.
By the way, my first year in the symphony, your mom was still there. Dodie was still playing in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for that 1 year. Yeah.
Yes, for me too. There's a few years there, and
Yeah.
I hear, Marina, that the incredible wit of that generation is not quite there so much anymore. I mean, it was a little bit more irreverence. I keep hearing you guys are better behaved now.
Yes.
But
Yes, young people now are much more boring than we were. Yes.
I tell you, if you are not bored for a second, and the ingenuity of the wit of that generation was amazing.
I must tell you that my father, playing in the bass section, almost got fired, got put on some sort of disciplinary something from the symphony when I don't remember I don't recall the situation, but at the end of the Star Spangled Banner, they'd all played the Star Spangled Banner, and my father yelled from the back, "Play ball!" and he got in trouble. So
Yeah.
that goes to show that probably wouldn't happen these days, but
No.
So at this point, let's see, I'm trying to get out of chat, and I would like to open up the questions to everybody else. I'll let you know when I've allowed you to unmute. If you have a question, unmute, but then if you know how to mute again, please go ahead and do that so that we can hear each other.
I have a question. If you all didn't want strings, could you go any other instruments? Did many of you have any secondary strings, secondary instruments that you preferred and sort of were pushed with the group? And did you drive a truck around to get to gigs?
Oh.
I'm used to big instruments.
Well, I'll tell you that I fell in love with a oboe player in junior high school, and I tried to play the oboe for a while. And unlike David, I was terrible, and it tickled so badly to play that it was pretty short-lived. And I can remember my parents carting us around, but they made sure that we all learned how to drive early, and they got our own cars.
We had a van, actually. Yeah, it was a big van.
Question, I had to come late, but I don't know if any of you talked about the Kenna Mason family in England, who are on television all the time. The cellist played at Prince Harry's wedding, and they seemed so compatible. Does anybody know them personally?
Nope.
No.
Fortunately not.
Extraordinary musicians.
Absolutely.
So I have two questions. One is that I had always understood that perfect pitch was an genetic talent, that it could not be learned. And Erica, I heard you say maybe that you and your sibs all learned perfect pitch. Tell me how that works.
Well, I certainly don't have any idea whether it's genetic or not. I don't believe anybody does. But we all do, and I really feel that our pitch recognition, a lot of it is practice. I do think that I don't know. I really don't know, but I've always felt that it's something that you can develop.
Okay, so.
Sorry.
My second question has to do with your sister, the twin, that's so good. I think you meant that she's not inhibited in her music performance. Does she do jazz, and does she do and now I've lost my word.
She plays all genres. Actually, I think the last picture that Debbie showed was a picture of her playing in a rockabilly group.
Oh my goodness.
She's just amazing, and to her detriment, she was never as disciplined in her formative years, but but she can she can play, improvise, all kinds of different genres. So
I had to step away for a second again, but are you still on perfect pitch, or did you pass that?
Just go ahead.
I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, because Marina, didn't our mom have perfect pitch?
Yes, she does.
She did, but I don't. And do you?
No.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, it seems like a lot of kids who start super young, like a Suzuki, does it seem like that more of them have perfect pitch? But it must be genetic, because I mean, because we started earlier than our mother did, so I don't know. There must be a genetic component to it.
May I interject a suggestion
just gotcha.
based on experiential knowledge as well? Some are born with perfect pitch, like Mozart or Prokofiev. It's very clear that they have it from the age of 3 or 4. With others that have excellent relative pitch, and I don't think you can be a musician without excellent relative pitch.
Right.
It can be acquired with assiduous concentration towards it. And that's based on neurological evidence.
Yeah, I found that I definitely do not have any kind of genetic perfect pitch, but over many years, I started to be able to hear that violin A that you tune to, and I could start with that in my head and then relatively figure out other pitches, but I can't just hear something as if it's a color and just immediately identify it.
I was contacted by a hospital on Long Island. I do have perfect pitch, and somehow they got my name, and they wanted to do a genetic test, and I spit into a test tube, and they wanted to know about my children and my grandchildren. My children do not have perfect pitch. My grandchildren were that 1-year-old, so they couldn't test them at that point, and I lost contact. But they are doing research about exactly this question.
Thank you.
I would also like to offer the classic song from the 40s. If you pitch, if I pitch, can you catch?
You know, on this topic, we have a really interesting comment from Marjorie Lynn. That she says she's heard that more Chinese have perfect pitch. She thinks because the language is tonal. I mean, you say something different if you don't get the tones right. That might be the case, but that would be sort of I would imagine it'd be more of a trained perfect pitch, unless somehow the gene is propagated in the population a little bit more.
You know, a few times I've worked with people that have perfect pitch and I don't. And I found that they had perfect pitch, but they couldn't tune. Serious. I mean, I would have my students would work with them and they would look to me to tune the students to the piano. So it was very strange.
Okay, so I do have to tell a story about a guy I dated at University of Texas who had perfect pitch, and it was so perfect that he couldn't do relative
Right.
pitch. So he told me that if something sounded in between, the perfection he heard in his head, he was rounding up or down in the wrong direction. And so when they were asked to identify intervals, he would just go straight to the pitch that he heard in his head, and often identify it wrong. So he would round up or down the wrong direction. He's like, well, this is sort of like a quarter tone in between, the way I hear things, and I'll just pick one, up or down. And he was getting all sorts of intervals wrong because of that.
I think I actually ran into that in college. A friend who had perfect pitch, and the piano was so badly out of tune that when she went to take her oral exam, she missed the chords because it was the wrong pitch. So I guess it's different maybe there are a lot of different iterations.
There are also different degrees of perfect pitch. I knew a violist who could tell the difference between 440A and 442A. I mean, he could hear vibrations.
Wow.
He could never do that.
There's also the very famous story of the young Brahms who had perfect pitch when he was playing with Remenyi, and he encountered a piano that was a quarter tone flat, and he transcribed, immediately. You must know that story, So again, it's,
That has happened. That happened to my mother once. It was the piano was a quarter tone off that she had to play with, and she was beside herself. I mean, she, for us, we would just tune the violin down,
right.
But it was terrible for her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Gayle has encountered that on occasion. And that's why, remember those wonderful recordings of Joe Stafford, the great, and she and her husband, Paul Desmond, I believe, they did a satire on that singer. I forgot what her character's name was, that she would always sing out of tune. And it was brilliantly excruciating,
Florence Foster Jenkins?
No, not Florence. No, the thing about her is that she thought she was singing well, that was her situation.
Charles Ives wrote a piece for two pianos tuned a quarter tone apart.
He would. Of course he did. Do you know what Charles Ives' name for someone who couldn't take dissonance? He actually had a name for the fellow who could not withstand dissonance. Anybody know that? No. Rollo. Come on, Rollo, stand up and take dissonance like a man. All right, I'm tuning out again. I can't wait for Gayle to play.
Right, Gayle, did you want to weigh in with any questions before we get to the music?
No, I've enjoyed. I think you kind of covered everything. It was reminding me a little. My sister and I are both pianists, and we grew up, and some of the stories sounded familiar. I do have one question, though. I assume that everybody had to practice kind of at the same time, and what was that like?
It was like being in music school, where you're in your own room and you hear someone next door, you just ignore it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Marina, didn't you were dating a tuba player once?
Oh yes. And in fact, when I was at Yale, we lived together, and we had a small apartment in a house that this landlady was this lovely Italian woman, and she would come upstairs and she'd say, "Oh, Steve, I just love hearing you practice." And when I would practice, she would say, "Oh, it's so loud," So that she loved the tuba. She loved the tuba.
One time he was visiting, and Mom would tell a story about how everybody was, it must have been during a holiday or something. So everybody, she said people walk by the house and there would just be all kinds of instruments coming out of different rooms and they'd just be like, what's going on there?
So thanks so much to our speakers. Before Gayle plays, I hope you have enough time to listen. She's going to kind of complete the Schumann she did at an October meeting with the first movement of the Schumann Fantasy. We found just in the archives an encore between me and Olive Chen that was done at the Musicale last year. It's just simple gifts, but at least it's in the vein of two string players playing violin and cello. It's the only thing we have a reasonably complete iPhone recording of. Next, we have Gayle Martin, and I think she wants to introduce her piece.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to be playing the first movement of the Schumann Fantasy. I have, this is going to be live on Zoom. I have, unfortunately, we have some yard people in other yards, and so you might hear mowing machines, etc. But this piece by Schumann was written at a time that Schumann and Clara, who became his wife, that they had fallen in love. Clara was about 16 years old at the time. Schumann was about 10 years older. And her father would not allow him to see Clara, probably because her father might have intuited that there was something wrong mentally with Schumann. But their love affair was real, and they sued the father. It was a very difficult time. This piece was a piece that Schumann worked on over about 4 or 5 years, and he wrote it in code for Clara. So the fantasy is prefaced by a quote from Schlegel, a German poet. Resounding through all the notes in the earth's many-colored dream, there sounds a faint, long-drawn tone for one who listens in secret. And so this piece is written in the key of C. It starts with that low note, which is the dominant of C. The first movement is rather long, but he doesn't resolve it into the key of C until the very, very end. He has a middle section which lands in the key of C minor, and that is marked to be played in the style of a legend. It's kind of like a musical fairy tale. And at the coda of the first movement, Schumann musically quotes a passage from Beethoven's Distant Beloved, To the Distant Beloved. an die ferne Geliebte. The text of that passage is, "Accept then these songs, my beloved, which I sing for you alone." And at the beginning of the first movement, his direction is to be played with imagination and passion throughout. So the fantasy was finally published in 1839, though he started it a few years before. And after a court battle, he married Clara in 1840, pretty much the day that she turned 21.
want to thank Gayle and also our speakers for just a fantastic program. I'm able to save the chat, so you'll see all sorts of wonderful accolades for everybody. So thanks to Marina Brubaker and David Brubaker and Erica Robinson for being here and demystifying your experience of growing up, and to Gayle Martin for your beautiful playing.